Next slide. There we go. So I have the honor of having the first land acknowledgement to say that we're hosting this session on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Coast Salish peoples. That includes the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh nations, as well as the Métis Charter Community of the Lower Mainland region, and wherever you are in the province, recognizing the land and the peoples where you are and committing to ongoing activities and learnings. And I will say that in my association with the people that you're going to hear shortly, I have learned and continue to learn a lot about Indigenous ways of knowing, seeing, thinking, and learning. And I'm very grateful to not only the people on today's call, but also all of their family and members from whom I've learned. Next slide, please. So province-wide rounds is a collaboration between the University of British Columbia Division of Nephrology and BC Renal. We have many partners and collaborate heavily with all of our health authority constituents, as well as our industry partners. And we thank you all for your support in allowing us to learn together to optimize patient and health system outcomes. Next slide. So today's province-wide rounds is acknowledging and respecting self-determination of Indigenous health and wellness. And we have three outstanding speakers who will introduce themselves a little bit more fully, but I wanted to give you a snapshot. Catherine Turner is a Red River Métis. Her maternal and paternal families originate from the historic Red River settlement in Manitoba. She's the Indigenous Liaison Manager with Can-SOLVE CKD Network and holds the position of Senior Research Coordinator of the BC Kidney Check Project with the First Nations Health Authority. Jocelyn Jones is First Nations and a member of the Shoal Lake 40, located in Ontario and the Saltoo First Nation territory. She's Indigenous. She is our Indigenous Peoples Research and Engagement Council, fondly known as IPERC, coordinator with the Can-SOLVE CKD Network. And Craig Settee is an Anishinaabe and Anehana Pompey Cree from Winnipeg, Manitoba. He's a citizen of Fisher River Cree Nation and with family ties to Dauphin River First Nation and Matheson Island in Manitoba. He is our cultural community manager with the Can-SOLVE CKD Network. And all three of our speakers are committed to amplifying the Indigenous voices within our network and to advancing the inclusion of Indigenous ways of knowing and being throughout the network's activities and research. We humbly recognize and value First Nations, Métis, and Inuit knowledge systems and the role of healers, elders, and knowledge carriers. And as I said, I have learned and continue to learn much from the three of you. Really looking forward to you sharing your insights, knowledge, and work with the province. So over to you.
Great. Thank you, Adira. We're just getting our slides up here as well. Good morning, everybody. Yes, thank you for sharing the acknowledgement territory as well. And I know we just wanted to start off by sharing that we're grateful as well to share that the Can-SOLVE CKD offices are located also on Coast Salish territory, specifically the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. And I'm grateful as well to be living out here as an uninvited guest to the territory. And with that, maybe we'll just go to the next slide. Yeah, so thank you for the introductions as well. And I just wanted to share that usually when I talk, I carry something with me to help ground me. And one of that today is a braid of sweetgrass. So always to carry some medicine with us. I know we carry medicine in our own being as well, but it's always good to carry something to hold on to and help you with some of those feelings that you go through when you're sharing stories and talking about the work that you do with community. And so I just wanted to share that yeah, I also come from Winnipeg, Manitoba, born and raised there. And yeah, Fisher River Cree Nations community come from, and Dauphin River is where my maternal family comes from as well. And with that, maybe I'll pass it over to Catherine to share any other intros she would like to.
Thanks, Craig, and thank you very much, Adira, for the introduction. Just want to add as well that I am calling in today from the unceded traditional territory of the Comox, Pentlach, and Satlut peoples in the beautiful Comox Valley. And a little bit more about me. I'm a wife, a mother to two wonderful adult children, and a nana to twin girls, and I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you. I'll pass it to Jocelyn.
Thanks, Catherine. Can you guys still see the webinar? Sorry, it disappeared when I unmuted. Okay, perfect. Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Adira, Catherine, and Craig. As Adira shared, I'm a proud member of Shoal Lake 40, and I'm coming to you from Kelowna on the beautiful unceded territory of the Silts Nation. Thank you. Back to you, Craig.
Great. Great. Next slide.
That work? It's not.
Not yet.
One second. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. So today we're going to be sharing a little bit about acknowledging and respecting self-determination of Indigenous health and wellness. And these are our learning objectives to inform about 6 R's of culturally relevant engagement and review a case study of process, to share engagement and development of Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, also known as IPERC, and to understand practices and protocols of engaging with Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers, and some information about learning pathway and cultural competency initiatives at the Can-SOLVE CKD network. And one thing that we wanted to do as well as we get started on our presentation was just to share a couple of questions with you, and if you felt inclined to share any answers or resources as well in the chat, we invite you to do so. And so our questions to you are, how do you amplify Indigenous voices at BC Renal and in your circles of influence? And what resources or tools do you use or feel empowered to use to advocate with Indigenous health? So we put those in the chat and just invite you to reflect on those as well as we go through our presentation. Next slide. So I just wanted to share a quote here as well to get us started, and I'll just read it out to us and continue on to our next slide. So there's no single Indigenous or Western ways of knowing, and it's easy to fall into the traps of homogenizing and othering by reducing vast and various traditions to simplistic and general terms. However, it's important to offer a starting point as part of our efforts to bring together Indigenous and Western perspectives into conversation with one another. Indigenous knowledges definitions can be problematic because they often use dominant knowledge systems as a frame of reference. Indigenous knowledges comprise a complex set of technologies developed and sustained by Indigenous civilizations, often oral and symbolic. It is transmitted through the structure of Indigenous languages and passed on to the next generation through modeling, practice, and animation, rather than through the written word. And that's a quote from Dr. Mary Batiste. And with that, I'll go to the next slide and pass it over to Jocelyn.
Thanks, Craig. So we wanted to acknowledge that the Can-SOLVE CKD network is committed to supporting the truth and reconciliation calls to action related to health, specifically 18, 19, and 23. Our initiatives aim to increase the understanding and treatment of chronic kidney disease in Indigenous communities and increase Indigenous voices within research to ensure they are heard and respected. So just as a reminder, TRC calls to action is we acknowledge the impact of historical traumas on Indigenous health. So this emphasizes the importance of recognizing and addressing significant disparities in health outcomes for Indigenous people. Call to action 19 is working to close the gaps in healthcare outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And 23 is the developing of cultural safety training for research team members, which calls upon the federal government in consultation with Indigenous people to establish measurable goals to close those healthcare gaps. So with that, we thought we would share a newly released resource called A Vision for Better Health, the Meno Ya Win video series. It's an Indigenous kidney health series for Indigenous people with chronic kidney disease, their caregiver, and healthcare providers. So the Meno Ya Win Indigenous Health Series was created by Can-SOLVE, was co-created by Can-SOLVE with the research team led by Dr. Joanne Capel, who was a former IPERC member, Dr. Carolyn Bullen, Knowledge Keeper George La Liberté, and with Indigenous people living with chronic kidney disease and their caregivers. So just a bit of background. The video series consists of informational and actual patient journeys. So there's 9 learning modules that describe the kidneys and their functions. There's 3 videos that have an overview of peritoneal dialysis, in-center home hemodialysis, and home hemodialysis procedures. And then there is 10 videos depicting Indigenous people and their journeys. And there's also a really great Canadian General Kidney Resource document included for further referencing and learning. So I strongly urge you to check this out. So I just wanted to share this with you. So fingers crossed there's no issues sharing that video. Can we hear it okay? Thumbs up.
I look normal, but I'm just shattered inside.
When I was diagnosed with kidney disease, I don't think I was fully aware of how it would impact my life.
My daughter. Pushed me to get checked out. So I went and realized that my kidneys were bad.
When I found out in 2002 I had kidney disease, my initial thought was that I was going to die.
And I've been suffering from kidney disease since 2012.
I got sick with lupus. It just happened so fast that my kidneys had got destroyed.
When I was told that my kidneys were failing, I thought my life is going to be over.
Tested me for my kidney function, and it was 30%. 30% kidney function on both sides.
It's a life change. I won't kid you. You change everything.
They asked me, what will you do when you have to go on dialysis? I said, nothing. I said, when the good Lord wants me back, I said, I'll go. I said,
After a while, I was taking my treatments. I started to feel better.
We have a kidney for you. I'm like, what? They're like, we have a kidney for you. Like, and I was speechless.
My choice to stop dialysis. It's a choice. It's a feeling.
A First Nations advocate at every in-center treatment would be very beneficial. They may know the question in their language, but they don't know how to ask it in English. And there's not always words in their language that apply to dialysis.
Potassium's too high. What does that mean? You know, creatinine or whatever that chemical. What does that mean? Like, you know, you're just like fumbling around trying to find out what things mean. And they need to have those conversations in a way that we can understand what those mean.
It's really important to reach out to get the help that you need to take care of yourself. It's not the end of your life. It's a lifetime, but it's not the end of your life. I really believe that everything will be all right.
Akamimo, don't give up, you guys too, don't give up on us, there's a lot of sick people out there, one day I'll be okay if I don't give up, It's
Right. Yes, that video series and the resources within there are really amazing. So again, strongly urge you to check it out. It is on the Can-SOLVE CKD website, and it's also in that link at the end there that they mentioned. Okay. Just wanted to give a little bit of background of the Can-SOLVE CKD network. We officially launched in 2016. So the original funding commitment in our grant was 40 million, and the actual funds received over the past 8 years total just over 34 million. Leading up to the launch of the Can-SOLVE CKD network in 2016, there was careful work done in partnership with patients living with kidney disease, their families, and they helped us identify our key research priorities. So our phase 1 went until, there's a little timeline between phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 went until 2023 because of an extension because of COVID, and phase 2 began in 2022, where we had 11.7 million in new funding and 8 million from over 38 partners, including BC Renal, Michael Smith Health Research BC, the University of British Columbia, the Kidney Foundation, and the Canadian Institute of Health Research, and many more. So that's just a bit of background of Can-SOLVE, and I will pass it back over to Catherine to share a little bit more.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So the Can-SOLVE CKD network is a national network that brings together kidney patients, researchers, healthcare providers, policymakers, caregivers. Next slide. We have 60 plus individuals engaged across Canada, and they include kidney patients, caregivers, donors, Indigenous people, women and men, all ages, individuals from urban, rural, remote, and diverse backgrounds. Next slide, please. So this is a visual of the Can-SOLVE CKD governance structure. There are 2 governing bodies within the network, the IPERC Council and the Patient Governance Council. Members of these councils are a part of numerous committees throughout the network. The Can-SOLVE CKD International Research Committee, Advisory Committee, Steering Committee, Research Operations Committee. We have the Executive Committee and the Core Operations Team. Within the network, work is also guided by the IPERC Council and the Patient Governance Circle. We have the Pediatrics Committee and the Knowledge User and Knowledge Translation Committee. And 2 Indigenous representatives recently joined the Leadership Committee. Next slide. Setting the context for all of this work. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for exercising their right to development. In particular, Indigenous peoples have the right to be actively involved in developing and determining health, housing, and other economic and social programs affecting them, and, as far as possible, to administer such programs through their own institutions. Article 23 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Next slide. I'd like to introduce you to the Indigenous Engagement Framework, the 6 R's. of culturally relevant engagement. Within this framework, we highlight the importance of respecting that Indigenous people and communities are diverse in their language, culture, protocols, spiritual practices, and ceremonies. Respect is to acknowledge that you are on Indigenous territories. Respect is to honor the self-determination of Indigenous peoples and the awareness that Indigenous people know what is needed to be successful. Relevance. We invite participation versus imposing participation within our activities. We will be wellness focused, focusing on strength base. We will incorporate and promote Indigenous knowledge, beliefs, values, practices, medicines, and models of health and healing into all health services that serve Indigenous people. Reciprocity. We actively listen in order that all voices are heard and understood. We are open-minded to cultural diversity, and we will show kindness in our words and actions. We will look for ways to give back and to share power. We partner with communities from the onset of our work, acknowledging time and contribution of individuals with appropriate compensation. Relationships. We foster meaningful relationships by working in collaboration with community, healthcare providers, leaders, and members, being accountable for our words and actions, partnering with communities to build trusting relationships. We will work to understand the community's outlook and the first-hand challenges from the beginning. We will share meals when possible, and we will lead by example. Reflection. We practice reflection by treating others the way that we want to be treated, by welcoming new members, partners, and by establishing meaningful relationships. By being open-minded and curious, acknowledging mistakes when we make them, and by being humble in our approach. Reconciliation, reconciliation. We will practice reconciliation by supporting Indigenous goals, truth and reconciliation, responding to the In Plain Sight report, the Truth and Reconciliation report, the TRC calls to action, UNDRIP, DRIPA, and other guiding reports on how to work effectively with Indigenous peoples. We will respect and honor Indigenous experiences and perspectives. We understand privilege, and we will use our position to transfer to those who have less. This resource was developed to assist project teams in carrying out authentic engagement with Indigenous peoples and communities. It is used by the Research Operations Committee to assess Indigenous engagement within project teams. Next slide. Thank you, Jocelyn. So in using that framework, I would like to share a case study illustrating how this collaborative research between an Indigenous elder, Indigenous patient partner, and project team members from Alberta can and do take place. And they are presented in this photo. So this Alberta project team started engagement by establishing relationships led by a two-eyed seeing approach, by utilizing the 6 R's of culturally relevant engagement practices and other cultural safety practices. This involved visits with elders, Indigenous community leaders and members, listening to stories and creating spaces to amplify Indigenous voices. By valuing the wisdom of elders and community members, researchers can foster sustainable practices that honor both scientific inquiry and cultural heritage. This model serves as an example for future collaborations across various fields, emphasizing the importance of mutual respect, understanding, and shared goals. This team presented their work and plans moving forward, their process of engagement, what that looks like, what it will continue to look like at the Alberta Spore Conference, and I believe it was in the spring of 2022. Next slide, please, Jocelyn. In December of 2022, I hope I'm getting the timing right. We hosted a gathering with the Can-SOLVE CKD network, knowledge keepers in research. We took the opportunity to ask them to share their perspectives on Indigenous measures of success within the work that we do. Some of what we heard was that measuring success in Indigenous healthcare requires a multifaceted approach that respects cultural values, addresses community needs, and incorporates both qualitative and quantitative indicators. How culturally safe is the care? What is deemed successful from the community members' perspectives? How involved and/or engaged is the community in the project and/or intervention? We heard about the importance of building community capacity. For example, success can be measured by visiting a remote community and by understanding the barriers to transportation for that community, barriers to their healthcare services, along with other barriers they experience. And so, how will we address gaps in Indigenous health and access to care? Next slide. We asked the knowledge keepers, how will we measure success? We heard about the importance and relevance of identity, culture, resurgence of traditions, ceremony, protocol, and teachings. Carried out through storytelling, self-determination, and relationality. Next slide. A two-eyed seeing approach. The gift of multiple perspectives, a conceptual framework coined by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall in 2004 for unifying knowledge systems. It is described as learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. Examples of two-eyed seeing practices within the network, working collaboratively with Indigenous peoples, Indigenous patient partners designing research questions, Indigenous patient partners prioritizing projects, co-authoring papers. There are currently 2 Indigenous research coordinators throughout the network, and hopefully looking to have more as time progresses. The learning pathway and the resources that have been developed within, and guidance from the IPERC Council. Next slide. Further examples carried out within the Can-SOLVE CKD network, publications that have been authored by patient partners within the Kidney Check Project, Stop Med Hemodialysis Project, Self-Management Project, the Learning Pathway, Coming Full Circle, the Sharing of Voices, Great Actions, Leave a Mark, which is a public awareness campaign that celebrates the gift of life through living organ donations. The campaign showcases stories and scars, the mark, from 40 living organ donors and transplant recipients across Canada including some of our own Indigenous patient partners, beautiful photos, as well as project team videos. Next slide. I felt it was really important to briefly highlight and touch on the work of the Kidney Check Project. This is like a prime example of culturally safe and relevant work. I wanted to touch on this because I believe that it is an excellent model of healthcare delivery and an effective practice to build upon. So in 2018, a memorandum of understanding was signed with the First Nations Health Authority to deliver the BC Kidney Check Project, with working in partnership with 16 First Nations communities across the province. To date, we've screened approximately 450 individuals. We've recently hired a registered nurse, Christian Alera, and he and I have scheduled community screening visits well into December. Future plans for the Kidney Check Project are so for myself as the research coordinator of this project, to continue leading the ongoing implementation of the BC Kidney Check Project, to develop and pilot a coaching framework for the BC Kidney Check Project, to identify strategic partners for the BC Kidney Check project, sketch out a plan for engaging or continuing to engage with them with a goal of identifying future funding for the program to help sustain the work, because it's fabulous. And now I'll pass it over to Jocelyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so we're going to go into more about the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, known as IPERC. So IPERC was created in 2016 to ensure that Indigenous patient partners have a voice within research. Our goals include fostering connections between Indigenous peoples and ongoing research, and as well current kidney education initiatives. So IPERC was formed to guide the conduct of Can-SOLVE's activities and sharing the unique experiences and aspects of patient-oriented research that involves First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So the purpose of IPERC is to facilitate meaningful engagement in research across Canada. And this was a photo when we were in Halifax in 2023. Okay, and then this is just a little bit more photos about the council. So we have over 20 plus members of Indigenous patients, caregivers, researchers, health practitioners, community leaders, and knowledge keepers. The most recent photo is on the top right in Montreal for our annual meeting where we gathered. So what we do, we engage and amplify Indigenous voices of Indigenous patient partners and network activities. So IPERC is involved within all levels of the Can-SOLVE CKD network, creating safe spaces for Indigenous people. And we are built on building relationships between Indigenous peoples and allies. So it's not just about networking or holding meetings, it's about creating genuine connections between Indigenous peoples and allies, and the active listening and being open to learning from one another. And that's critical in what we do. Supporting Indigenous perspectives and research and respectful partnerships with Indigenous peoples and communities, and the developing resources and relationships to support culturally competent engagement with Indigenous people and communities. So, for example, if not all, I believe all IPERC members have been involved in the development of resources that support culturally competent engagement with Indigenous peoples, and always from the beginning. So just wanted to highlight some key activities. I'd mentioned the engage and amplify Indigenous patient partners' voices. We are here to support project teams with consultation on engagement strategies, cultural competency, and may offer letters of support. And we are here for the access to ongoing Indigenous cultural competency training, workshops, and learning. So I just wanted to touch on our key priorities that have been identified by Council within our strategic plan. So we have relationship building and connection, governance and administration, building capacity and advocacy, and research and engagement. So the importance of establishing strong relationships with all Indigenous people, celebrating our journeys, sharing wellness opportunities, looking at Indigenous focused funding, increasing education and nation-based protocols, and for effective governance, ensuring that our administration processes are aligned with Indigenous ways of knowing and being, reviewing and renewing our work to maintain relevant support and presence within the network. And then just to touch on that, IPERC does meet once a month. One bi-monthly is a business meeting, and then every other month we focus on connections. So we call it our T and Bannock meeting. So lastly, I wanted to touch on the Howard Vincent Reconciliation Award. Howard was a patient partner with IPERC, who is no longer with us. He was known through the network as a strong and passionate voice for those living with chronic kidney disease. Howard brought many remarkable attributes to the network, including his candor and willingness to speak honestly and openly. He had a knack for voicing important and sometimes uncomfortable perspectives that challenged conventional ways of thinking and forced us to really reflect on our work. So we have called it the Howard Vincent Reconciliation Award, that honors a non-Indigenous individual who has demonstrated commitment to furthering reconciliation with Indigenous people within the Can-SOLVE CKD network, or who has inspired others to continue reconciliation efforts. With that, I will pass it over to Craig.
Great, thanks, Jocelyn. Yeah, whenever I see that that slide of Howard, it always kind of takes you back when you're remembering some of our friends and our relatives that have done this work for us, and how we continue to carry that on. And so I think this slide also speaks to that spirit of Howard in talking about decolonization. So just what it says on the screen here about challenging the dominance of West in knowledge production, in research. And I would also say even in care, it means using approaches that capture the context and prioritize needs and experience and beliefs of research and care participants in the regions that we're working. And so for me, this work in Can-SOLVE, some of the examples of challenging this and bringing Indigenous ways of knowing into our work has included some of the local protocol as well. So, including offering gifts for speakers to come participate, and acknowledging the territories that we're on. So, inviting speakers and people from host nations here to come and open meetings, but also to participate in the meetings and share their thoughts and insights and priorities as well around the work that we're doing. Sometimes we've also included some blanket ceremonies. So in this picture here, you'll see a group of us, and right after this picture, there was a blanketing ceremony of some of the patient partners who were involved in some of the work around IPERC, and also around sharing our stories, as well as different patients and caregivers. There's also been some cedar brushing. I know that's a practice that's done here as well on the West Coast. And I'll just share too that I come from the prairies, and the prairies, Cree and Anishinaabe people there, we often do tobacco offerings when we're asking people for information or for guidance, spiritual guidance, ceremonial guidance. And sometimes we do that as well, just to the spiritual work that we're doing, as well as smudging. Smudging comes a little bit more, I think, from the prairie regions as well, around using medicines to burn and use that smoke to cleanse our essences, as well as sweat lodge ceremonies. So I know that's something we've done in the past. At one of our past annual meetings, we hosted a sweat lodge ceremony when we were in Montreal, and yeah, we had a local knowledge keeper and friends there who were able to help us to carry out that ceremony and offer it to patient partners and people who were attending the annual meeting to come and share that space with us. Next slide. So speaking a little bit about learning pathway, so there's been a learning pathway that's been developed in phase 1 and continues to be implemented throughout phase 2. And so the aim of the pathway is to enable research team members to build culturally safe and respectful partnerships with Indigenous peoples, their communities in health research. And yeah, this image here is also just some work that was done as well in the past around just offering cloth and tobacco and ribbons as well to share in that work and ask for guidance in a good way. And on the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit more about the pathway. So the development of the pathway has included, addition of a few learning markers, and one of them is to start off is supporting each other's journey at Land Acknowledgement Learning Series. So I'm sure you're well aware of the protocol of acknowledging the territory that you're on. And I think that's beneficial in just understanding the nations that have lived on the territories that we reside long before colonization had occurred. And so that's one of the learning series that was developed as part of this pathway, as well as sharing a little bit more around history is the Kairos blanket exercise. I think it's a really powerful in-person workshop that really showcases the dislocation and movement of Indigenous nations, not of their own volition, but through the practices of expansion and colonization in Canada. And then there's also the Sanyas Indigenous Cultural Safety Training, very useful training as well. I know I've just taken it a second time earlier this year, and really love the work that they do with the Sanyas program. We've also developed webinar series. So Dr. Malcolm King shares some insights and ethics and protocols as well around Indigenous research ethics and protocols. And what I'll be talking a little bit more about in detail is the next learning marker in here, knowledge keepers in research. So Catherine also alluded to some of the slides that were developed there with knowledge keepers gathering that we hosted back in 2022. And even prior to that, we engaged with them throughout phase 1 in the development of the guidebook as well. So there's a guidebook that complements the learning series that was released as well in 2023. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in some next slides. And after that is OCAP training and a cultural competency knowledge bundle, which also just includes some more resources as well to encourage people along their cultural competency and cultural safety, humility, learning journeys. Yeah, next slide. So I have a quote here as well from Dr. King in regard to involving knowledge keepers in research, that it's important to move away from learning about them and to learn from them, and that knowledge keepers and elders can play an important role in that. And so, as I mentioned, blanketing ceremonies, we also were fortunate to have a couple of local knowledge keepers in Latash and Dili and Nahani, who were always so gracious to offer their time and come and work with us. And so what they had done was agreed to do a blanket ceremony with the knowledge keepers after we had had this meeting with them. And this meeting was also when we were able to film some short interviews with them that were used for the video series. And I encourage you all to take a look at those videos, because there's a big difference in reading quotes from the knowledge keepers in written word, and an ability to hear them speak in their own words and in their own languages. And just to hear that, because you get a much different vibe when you're hearing those knowledge keepers share the important work that they do and the teachings that they carry. So on the next slide, I have another image here about some of the work that was done. So we had the graphic illustrator there come and capture a lot of the conversations that were happening. And so in terms of the knowledge keepers and research, I think what was very evident from them was talking about culture and how culture saves lives. And so on the left side there, you'll see the cedar brushing, and that was a part of the gathering that we had. But really, this work with them is on the right hand side of the screen here, so helping to close the gaps in kidney health outcomes. And what was really important and relevant to me was, although not all of the knowledge keepers have a hand in kidney research, they do all have a hand in ensuring that their communities are safe, that their communities are healthy, and their communities are well. And so I think that's the really important piece of engaging knowledge keepers in research, is they are often the leaders that we go to, and they're often the leaders that our leaders go to, community chiefs and councils, hereditary chiefs. These are the people that I think we lean into and often ask for guidance in our work, in all sectors, not just health, but in all other sectors of health and education and all of that. And so really important to engage and build relationships with knowledge keepers, because if you can engage respectfully and get knowledge keepers to help guide you, I think that often there is a lot better community buy-in when you can get knowledge keepers on board to help you. And so maybe on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about some of that. And so, they talked a bit about as well the different roles that knowledge keepers have. So, there are knowledge keepers that do ceremony work. There's knowledge keepers that do that are also, PhDs and doctors, but there's also Indigenous ways of knowing where, they practice ceremonies that also help to heal our communities. And so this was captured in here around them sharing their wisdom. And yeah, the image here also shows about the blanketing ceremony and the resurgence that our communities are bringing to the table when we talk about our health and our wellness and prioritizing that. And so on the next slide here, I'll just share a little bit that this is the practice of also indigenizing the work that we're doing to challenge the dominant narratives about our collective histories, our contemporary aspirations and challenges, and that indigenization is also about supporting Indigenous communities and people's goals for self-determination. And so, we do have voices, and we're starting to hear them loud and clear. And so just sharing these pictures as well from the BC Kidney Check signing of their MOU, and the one on the right here was a more recent one when we had a knowledge keeper panel at our 2023 annual meeting in Halifax, and they were able to come and share their experience as well. And so on the next slide, just wrapping up a little bit around what's next for our work. Phase 2 of Can-SOLVE focuses on 4 pillars. One of them is around advancing cultural competency. So we continue to, carry out this work in our circles. We also have an Indigenous initiatives work plan that follows the IPERC strategic plan as well. So those same themes in the IPERC plan are ones that we look to carry out as well as a Indigenous initiatives team, as well as IPERC continuing to co-build engagement and governance in the network. and always working to identify additional learning gaps to enhance our work. We'll really try to make our work better and relevant to the communities that we work with and that we serve. And so on the next slide, we'd just like to say thank you. Kinanaskamet na wow, miigwech, marci, hichka. I think we just have a Q&A period. I know we're getting close to time here, so if there are any questions, maybe I'll open the floor.
We have a few minutes for questions. Thank you for that. It's hard in 45 minutes or so to capture all the work of IPERC and Can-SOLVE CKD and the work around the country that's being done. But I think you've given us a great snapshot for sure. Questions for BC, I think perhaps undersold is the fact that of all the provinces that are doing kidney check, BC is sort of the lead in terms of how far we've come, how much community engagement there is. And I think that's testimony to both the team as well as, readiness of the Indigenous peoples and First Nations health authorities to really embrace this as Catherine said, as a novel way of understanding health and kidney health within communities. So thank you for that. And I think each of the health authorities has a designated physician who the kidney check team can call if there's a problem or something identified. And I thank all the medical professionals who have stepped up for that. Let me see, there's a question from Christina. Just hearing about the Meno Ya Win health series, thrilled to be able to share this with my kidney care clinic and dialysis teams. And I'm thanking you for that hard work, which is great. That's Joanne Capel and the group in Saskatchewan that spearheaded that. I think the important thing for all of us is the plethora of resources that are available and learning opportunities for us as well as others. Carolyn, you have your hand up, so over to you. You have time to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This dazzling array of resources and really, really nice graphics. So I'm, Caroline Stiganta. I'm a nephrologist over in Island Health, and also I'm very pleased to be the chair of our Sustainable Nephrology Action Planning Committee of CSN, and also to chair the Planetary Health Working Group here at BC Renal. So this is so helpful. What we've tried to do at SNAP, at our CSN committee, is something that is, we hope, meaningful and informative. We have this rotating, we've called it a territorial acknowledgement, but I don't think.
Carol, I think you inadvertently muted yourself. If you could please unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. We wanted to make it more meaningful. So we rotate around and we find a local story that usually is ecologically themed and tied to Indigenous people. So one example locally was reef net fishing. So I prescribe to the Wasanich newsletter, and there's always something that's interesting and seasonal that comes out. So we kind of educate ourselves on that. We kind of reflect on the state of the fisheries and the reemergence of these things. So, it's very much settler people looking to be informed by Indigenous stories. I don't know if it matters that we sort of tag that along to a territorial acknowledgement, but just, I guess, reflecting a bit of our discomfort that it seems a bit tokenistic to say, yes, we're on these lands and now let's get down to our business. We want to kind of educate in a more meaningful way. So I'm not sure if I'd love people's thoughts on that, and how maybe if we should be calling it something different or structuring that in a different way, or calling in guests to inform us better so we have a maybe more rounded perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. I know that I think in Indigenous communities too, there are people who question territorial land acknowledgements as just acknowledging it and then carrying on.
Yeah.
And I think for me, an important part of the acknowledgement is it is great to acknowledge, but it's also a reminder. It's good to be a constant reminder of the territories that we're on, and that the nations do exist and the people do exist still in these places. And so it's good to acknowledge, but it's also, I think, a part of cultural safety is using that knowledge and acknowledgement to also put into practice, into, how can I support? And so I think that's also why we posed the question as well at the beginning of the session here today, was how do you amplify Indigenous voices? Are there resources that you are comfortable to use? And so I think that's just our way to help reflect to the general population, not only at BC Renal, but in our other, circles of influence, to encourage people to prioritize Indigenous health as well, to share and share the resources and share the connections that they have with community. So not sure if I answered your question totally, but I think those are just some thoughts that come to mind when thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, and I would also like to add that I think it's like incredibly important and, really great if there is opportunity to invite guests. Opportunity to engage is so important. Building on those relationships is definitely a measure of success, and working together and ongoing learning opportunities, from one another as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's also a question in the chat, and I realize we're at time, so there's never enough time to have all these questions, but an Indigenous patient advocate contact we can share with our clients. I think every health authority is intended to have an Indigenous liaison person. The program that we've showed here is independent of any of the health authorities. And so, I suggest, Alyssa, that you contact directly your health authority or institution if you're looking for Indigenous wellness liaisons and advocates. Is that fair, Craig, Catherine, and Jocelyn? Yeah. And there are in the chat are the Can-SOLVE resource training modules. For those of you that have not done SANIA's training or bystander to ally as the second module, I highly recommend them as learning tools in addition to the Can-SOLVE learning resources, books to read, people to talk to. And again, I want to thank Craig, Catherine, Jocelyn, the entire Can-SOLVE team, and the IPERC group for their leadership and guidance on our learning journey. And to all of you for listening, and I hope you take with this and with you over the weekend reflections on this. So thank you all very, very much.